I was reborn of ice and snow. My past is a dull ache of distant pain. For as long as I can remember, I dwelled within the bleak expanse, the spirits and creatures of winter my only companions. During this time, my powers have grown from a twinkling icicles to shredding storms, from gentle snowdrifts to crushing avalanches. My arcane talent speaks to the frigid forces of Wright's most isolated and hostile environment. Even though my memories remain clouded, my will is as hard and clear as a frosty morning. No matter where I go, I carry the fierce beauty of the frozen north with me. The ice has been my shelter. The ice is now my strength. Today we will be looking at Iyslander Stormbind. If you don't know the fundamentals and general game mechanics, I strongly suggest watching the Learn to Play guides by LSS. Link will be in the description. Iyslander was first introduced in the second supplemental Flesh and Blood set Everfest as a young hero in February 2022, with her adult version released a few months later in the Uprising set. Aether is the central knowledge base of all arcane arts in Wraith. Each school of the arcane manipulates Aether in its own way based on divergent teachings and philosophies, but the raw-based property is always Aether. Unlike melee fighters who trade blows using the combat chain, defending arcane damage requires special equipment, items, or damage prevention effects. Let's look at her hero ability. Firstly, Iyslander has Essence of Ice. This means you may have ice cards in your deck. Secondly, if it's not your turn, you may play a non-attack action card with blue color strips from your arsenal as though they were instant. Also, it says, whenever you play an ice card during your opponent's turn, create a Frostbite token under their control. Iyslander beckons and bends winter at her whim. It's one thing to know the conditions you're facing, it's another when the icy winds of winter close in unexpectedly at an instant. Use Iyslander's Frostbite ability to disrupt opponents at instant speed midway through their turn. The Frostbite token says, cards and activated abilities you control cost an additional resource. At the beginning of your end phase, or when you play or activate an ability, destroy Frostbite. For each Frostbite an opponent controls, they must pay an additional resource when playing a card or activating an ability. This includes, but not limited to, hero, weapon, equipment, and item abilities. If the additional resource cost is paid when a card is played, or the opponent passes their turn, all Frostbite tokens they control are destroyed. As you journey with Iyslander, you will have access to the Wizard, Ice, Elemental, and Generic card pool. To keep this guide as simple as possible, I will limit the cards covered to a few. I just want to note quickly that I will not cover the Iyslander playstyle popularized by world champion Michael Hamilton and keep the basic premise of this hero. Iyslander has many weapons to choose from, but today we will cover two. Firstly, Iyslander's signature weapon is Kraken's Aether Vein. This two-hand staff weapon can only be wielded by wizards such as Iyslander. It mentions, once per turn instant, for 3 resources, deal 1 arcane damage to targeting opposing hero. Draw a card for each arcane damage dealt this way. The second weapon and most widely used with Iyslander is Waning Moon. It mentions, once per turn instant for 2 resources, deal 2 arcane damage to target hero. If it's not your turn, instead, deal 3 arcane damage to them. Activate this ability only if you've played a non-attack action this turn. By using either of these weapons, use Iyslander's Frostbite ability and ice cards to tax the opponent's resources and create windows where they can't prevent the damage. I will demonstrate some examples using both Kraken's Aether Vein and Waning Moon in the gameplay. Let's have a look at some budget equipment that can be used with this hero. Spellfire Cloak says, instant, destroy Spellfire Cloak, gain 1 resource, activate this ability only during an opponent's turn. Secondly, this equipment has built-in Arcane Barrier 1. This will be extremely useful against heroes that deals arcane damage such as other wizards, illusionists, and moonblades. Do note that once the instant ability is used, the equipment will be destroyed and all other utilities will be lost. Next we have the Ice Wizard Arm Equipment Conduit of Frostburn. Not used as much, but not a bad budget option. Instant. Destroyed Conduit of Frostburn. The next card you play this turn with an effect that deals arcane damage gains. When this deals arcane damage to a hero, destroy a frozen card in their arsenal. This one has some utility if you play cards that can freeze cards in your opponent's arsenal. Secondly, this equipment also has Quell 1. If your hero would be dealt damage, you may pay 1 resource to prevent 1 of that damage. If you do, destroy Quell at the beginning of the end phase. This is great if you have to prevent multiple instances of 1 damage on 1 turn. Iyslander plan is to disrupt her opponent's turn and setting up Frostbites and or Ice Afflictions under their opponent's control, whilst chipping away at their life total. Let's have a look at some examples of ice cards that Iyslander can use. Winter's Bite, a great yet simple ice action card that says, target hero discards a card unless they pay 3 resources in red, 2 in yellow, and 1 in blue. Go again. When the opposing hero is down to their last card in hand, using Iyslander's hero ability can put a stop to their well-laid plan. Cold Snap. Target hero may pay 3 resources in red, 2 in yellow, and 1 in blue. If they don't, freeze a card in their arsenal or an ally they control until the start of your next turn. Note here, a frozen object can't be played or activated. If Cold Snap is played from arsenal, draw a card, go again. This one synergizes well with the Conduit of Frostburn equipment mentioned earlier. Blizzard is an instant ice spell that says, target attack loses and can't gain go again unless the attacking hero pays 2 resources. Your opponent wants to attack multiple times each turn? Blizzard will stop them in their tracks. Paired with Iyslander's hero ability being an ice card, the additional Frostbite gives it that little bit of extra bite. Frosting, Aether Hail, and Ice Bolt are all simple wizard ice cards that deals arcane damage. This is a great filler action and particularly useful in Blue Pitch as it synergizes well with her hero ability. Let's now have a look at some elemental wizard cards that utilizes the fusion mechanic. The first one is Aether Ice Vein. Ice Fusion. As an additional cost to play Aether Ice Vein, you may reveal an ice card from your hand. Deal 5 arcane damage in red, 4 in yellow, and 3 in blue to any target. If Aether Ice Vein was fused and deals damage to your hero, they discard a card unless they pay 2 resources. This means when you play a card with fusion, you may reveal a card from your hand to gain the additional effect. For example, let's pretend we have a Winter's Bite in hand. We reveal it when we play Aether Ice Vein, which means if it deals damage, the opponent must discard a card or pay the resource costs. This can be extremely crushing if they can't efficiently deal with the arcane damage. Do note, at time of recording, Aether Ice Vein is currently suspended in the Blitz format. You can still play this card in all other formats. If you want to learn more about card legality, I will add a link to this description. Freezing Point is an interesting one. This one is particularly potent when utilized late game when you can threaten lethal. It says, Ice Fusion. Deal 5 arcane damage to target hero. If Freezing Point was fused, instead, deal X arcane damage, where X is 5 plus the number of Frostbite, Ice Afflictions, and Frozen cards they control. We will have a look at what an Ice Affliction is a little later, and will offer an example on how this card can be used in the gameplay. Voices echo across the bleak expanse, carried to her by the winds of change. She hears the screams of war. She listens to the whispers of suffering. She is ready to answer their call. Some cards called auras will present powerful bonuses and can be quite impactful if you can manage to keep them in play for several turns. Channel the Bleak Expanse. Go again. Heroes can't reveal cards, search decks, or draw cards from effects. This one is a little situational but can be quite interesting when played against heroes that heavily utilize one or all of these effects. But be mindful that whilst this aura is on the board, Iyslander will be unable to ice fuse as it mentions heroes, not just opponent. The second part of this card is important to understand, as this is how we can get this aura to stick around for a few turns. Channel Ice. At the beginning of your end phase, put a flow counter on Channel the Bleak Expanse. Then destroy it unless you put an ice card from your pitch zone on the bottom of your deck for each flow counter on it. Channel Lake Frigid. Go again. Cards and activated abilities cost opposing heroes an additional resource. Think Frostbite is oppressing? With this aura, your opponent will be forced to pay an extra resource on all cards and activated ability whilst Channel Lake Frigid is under your control. Being a channel aura, like the previous one, it also has the channel clause. I will not be covering the channel auras today, but if you want to see them in action, I highly suggest you going to watch my video on Lexi Livewire. The gameplay will show examples. The last aura we will look at is Insidious Chill. Insidious Chill enters the arena with 3 frost counters on it. When it has no frost counter on it, destroy it. Whenever you ice fuse, remove a frost counter from Insidious Chill. If you do, target hero discards a card unless they pay 2 resources. This means in addition to the ice fuse effect on the card being played itself, the opponent will have the Insidious Chill effect to deal with as well, adding further disruption. The next card worth mentioning is the wizard action Emeritus Scolding. Deal 4 arcane damage in red, 3 in yellow, and 2 in blue to target hero. If Emeritus Scolding is played during an opponent's turn, instead, deal 6 arcane damage in red, 5 in yellow, and 4 in blue to target hero. All heroes have specific specialization cards that can only be played in their respective hero deck. For Iyslander, we have Ice Eternal and Frost X. The first one is Ice Eternal. It says, Ice Fusion. Create X Frostbite tokens under target hero's control. Then if Ice Eternal was fused, deal arcane damage to that hero equal the number of Frostbite they control. You will notice here that the cost of the card is XX, meaning to play X number of Frostbites, it will be required to pay the cost twice. For example, 1 Frostbite will cost 2 resources, and 3 Frostbites will cost you 6. Next we have the Ice Affliction Aura Frost X. It says, Frostbites you control have, at the beginning of your end phase, this deals 1 arcane damage to you. When this enters the arena, it is placed under the opponent's control. At the beginning of their end phase, if they still have a Frostbite under their control, Frost X will deal 1 arcane damage per Frostbite controlled. Only specific and very few cards can destroy this aura, meaning your opponent will likely not get a chance to rid themselves of this Ice Affliction. If you're considering playing Iyslander, you will have access to higher quality equipment. There are a few options here, so I will only cover a few. Firstly, let's have a look at Stormstriders, the legendary wizard leg equipment from Arcane Rising, and probably the most prominent piece of equipment for wizards in general. Instant. For 1 resource, destroys Stormstriders. You may play your next wizard non-attack action card this turn as though it were an instant. Think you are holding a lethal in your hand? Crush your opponent by destroying Stormstriders and killing your opponent on their own turn. Secondly, this equipment has built-in Arcane Barrier too. This will be extremely useful against other wizards. Alluvian Constellas is another great equipment when your opponent is likely to deal arcane damage. The first time Alluvian Constellas prevents arcane damage each turn, if it has less than 4 energy counters, you may put an energy counter on it. Instant. Remove 2 energy counters from Alluvian Constellas. The next staff ability you activate this turn costs 3 resources less. Being able to use your staff for free is pretty neat. This also has Arcane Barrier 1. Lastly, we have Coronet Peak. Action. For 3 resources, target hero discards a card unless they pay 1 resource. This can be great at the end of your turn. Punish your opponent by stripping them a card in hand. It also has an unconditional block value of 2. Do note, being a blade break equipment, when the combat chain closes, if this defended, Coronet Peak will be destroyed. Just a quick disclaimer, many heroes benefit from using generic legendary equipment, and Iyslander is definitely no exception, especially for the Fyendel Spring Tunic. but I will not be including these today. Alright, let's have a look at a few possible hands, only utilizing the equipment introduced today. Since Iyslander often plays on the opponent's turn, I will show a few different gameplay mechanics. For this first example, let's do a fusion. Your 4 cards are Winter's Bite Blue, Aether Icevein Red, Channel Lake Frigid, and Ice Bolt Blue. Firstly, let's play the red Aether Icevein, pitching the blue Ice Bolt. Let's reveal the blue Winter's Bite to Ice Fuse the Aether Icevein. Aether Icevein says, deal 5 arcane damage to any target, and now it gains. If Aether Icevein deals damage to a hero, they discard a card or they pay 2 resources. Let's say our opponent doesn't have enough arcane barrier to stop the arcane damage. They decide to take all 5 of this damage. They will need to pay the cost, discard a card or pay 2 resources. Let's say they pitch a yellow and pay the cost. Let's now use the once per turn weapon instant ability and pitch the blue Winter's Bite. Kraken's Aether Vein will now come in for 1 arcane damage. If this deals 1 damage, we will draw a card. Let's say the opponent pitched a red card to Arcane Barrier and prevents the damage. We will now end our turn and place Channel Lake Frigid in Arsenal. Since we didn't reveal this card to our opponent, this can be a great disrupt on their next turn. For the second example, let's switch it up a bit and play on our opponent's turn. We will continue from our turn with the Channel Lake Frigid in Arsenal. Last turn, our opponent had to pitch 2 cards to pay for our disruption, leaving them with 2 cards for their turn. Let's pretend they did not have an arsenal. The 4 cards we drew up are Frosting Red, Cold Snap Blue, Aether Icevein Yellow, and Aether Hail Blue. Let's say our opponent decides to use their Goliath Gauntlet. This equipment gives +2 attack power to their next attack action card that costs 2 resources or more. This gives us a lot of information. We know that our opponent only has 2 cards in hand, and knowing that one of the cards they are trying to play will cost 2 or more, let's disrupt this. Let's respond to them playing the Goliath Gauntlet by playing Channel Lake Frigid from Arsenal, pitching the yellow Aether Icevein. Since Channel Lake Frigid is an ice action aura, this will give a Frostbite under our opponent's control. This means the next card or activated ability they play will cost an extra 1 resource. But wait, Channel Lake Frigid also says cards and activated abilities cost opposing heroes an additional resource. So not only they have to pay an extra resource from the Frostbite, but also for the Channel Lake Frigid. This completely stops our opponent's turn since we know that they can't pay 4 resources to play their 2 or more resource attack action off the 1 card left in hand. They decide to pass priority back to us since they can't pitch or play any cards. This means they also lose the Goliath Gauntlet without being able to get any value out of it. Before moving to our turn, let's use the once per turn instant Kraken's Aether Vein ability and pitch the blue Aether Hail. Our opponent pitched to Arcane Barrier 1 to prevent the damage and avoid us a card draw for our turn, because remember, this currently is still our opponent's turn. Turn ends, they place their last card in Arsenal, and the Frostbite token goes away. Normally here, we would need to deal with the Channel Ice from the Channel Lake Frigid, but since this was played on our opponent's turn, our beginning of end phase will be on our upcoming turn. So meaning Channel Lake Frigid will stick around without us needing to place a flow counter on it. Pretty annoying, I know. For our third example, let's switch some of our equipment and use Waning Moon as our weapon. Let's pretend it is late in the game. We'll set up for some explosive damage on our opponent's next turn. Our 4 cards are Ice Bolt Blue, Aether Hail Red, Frost Hex, and Emeritus Scolding Blue. Firstly, let's play our red Aether Hail for 4 arcane damage, pitching the blue Emeritus Scolding. We will have 2 resources floating. Let's pretend our opponent has 3 arcane barrier across all their equipment. They pitch a blue to block 3 of the arcane and taking 1 damage. Since we played a non-attack this turn, we can now use the once per turn instant from our Waning Moon, using the 2 remaining resources and coming in for 2 arcane damage. Let's say our opponent decides to take 2 arcane damage. We will end our turn and place the Frost Hex in Arsenal. What cards that should be pitched or kept for our opponent's turn is sometimes dependent on what hero you are up against, how many cards they have left in their hand, and how much arcane barrier they may have access to. Often the better choice would be placing the Emeritus Scolding in Arsenal. Determining this gets easier with practice. Since this is more of a learn to play tutorial, I made the decision to demonstrate Frost Hex for this example. For our last example, we'll continue from our last turn and act on our opponent's turn. Our opponent pitched 1 card to block 3 arcane, so let's pretend they have 3 cards in hand. The cards we drew up are Ice Bolt Blue, Cold Snap Blue, Freezing Point, and Insidious Chill. Let's represent our life total on the top left corner. Let's say our opponent is playing Dash. If you want a bit more information on how to play Dash, there is a Learn to Play video, link will be in the description. Let's say our opponent plays a Red Throttle, pitching a Yellow Zipper hit, boosting it to gain Go again. This is coming in for a total of 6 damage. So looking at the information our opponent is giving us, they have no resources floating, and 1 card remaining in hand. So we can either assume they will be playing a 0-cost card, pitch to use the Techloplasma Pistol, or Arsenal Pass. Since 6 damage is not lethal, let's get a bit more information and take the 6 damage going down to 3. Let's say the last card they had in hand was a red 0 to 60, coming in for 4. Being on 3, we either need to block, but we do know they ran out of resources, so we could try to represent lethal on their turn. Let's respond by first playing the Ice Affliction Aura Frost Hex, pitching the blue Insidious Chill. This will enter under their control. Since Frost Hex is an Ice Affliction aura, this will also give them a Frostbite. Next, let's break our spell Fire Cloak to gain 1 resource, and use this resource to use the Storm Striders. We can now play a Wizard non-attack action as though it were instant. Let's play Freezing Point, pitching the blue Cold Snap. Let's Ice Fuse by revealing the blue Ice Bolt. Freezing Point is coming in for 5 arcane, but let's have a closer look at the fuse. It says, if Freezing Point was fused, instead deals X arcane damage, where X is 5 plus the number of Frostbites, Ice Afflictions, and Frozen cards they control. Looking at their side of the board, they currently control 1 Frostbite and 1 Ice Affliction. This means Freezing Point will be coming in for a total of 7 arcane damage, going down to 3. Since we played a non-attack this turn, we can now use the once per turn instant from our Waning Moon, pitching the blue Ice Bolt. Since this is on our opponent's turn, Waning Moon will be coming in for a total of 3 arcane damage. With your opponent unable to prevent this damage, the game will be over. In the instance that your opponent has Spell Void equipment to prevent 1 of this damage, there is a possibility to use the Metacarpus nodes on the Freezing Point to give it an extra point of damage. We must not forget about the Ice Affliction Frost X. If they control a Frostbite at the end of their turn, it will deal 1 arcane, so we were pretty covered. To conclude, Iyslander is probably one of the hardest hero to master, but don't be afraid to try it out, as she is quite fun to learn. No matter where she goes, Iyslander carries the fierce beauty of the frozen north with her. The ice has been her shelter, the ice is her strength. This was Jackie for the Fab Workshop. See you next time, and thanks for watching.